everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's episode is a serious change of pace from what you would typically expect from the show. I recently had the chance to travel down to Juneau, Alaska to visit my state's capital and to attend this year's Alaska Robotics Minicon. Now, because it is a small event in Alaska and a part of Alaska that many of you have probably never been to, it's very possible you've never heard of it. But it is an amazing event and one that features some of the biggest names in comics, including folks like Raina Telgemeier, Scott McCloud, Erica Moen, Dave Kellett, and a whole lot more. But also just like the best vibes out of any convention I've ever been to by a mile. It is a community event. It is spectacular, and I loved it. But while I was there, I thought it would be fun to mix things up a bit and record an episode of Off Panel that was a little bit different than usual. With it hitting right after the 500th episode of the show, I wanted to change up the conversation a bit and move it away from the work that's being done towards, why people love the medium to begin with. In short, I wanted to celebrate comics by talking to creators about why they love comics so much. It is a magical medium, one we all love to read. But these folks turn that passion into something more, becoming creators of some of our favorite comics. And that's what we have today, as I had short, one-on-one, 10 to 15-minute chats with cartoonist Kazu Kibuishi, writer Ryan North, and cartoonist Lucy Knisley about that subject. Standard notes about convention recordings apply here, as these chats were held in the con green room, outside the convention itself, kind of in the rain, to be honest, and in a classroom where it was held, respectively. But each was delightful, and I hope you enjoy them. So, to start, here's my conversation with Kazu Kibuishi, the cartoonist of the Amulet series, about his own love of comics and how it continues to evolve. I hope you dig it. All right, Kazu, we're going to be talking about why you love comics so much. And I just want to start there. You've been doing this for a while. Can you remember, what was it originally that made you love comics so much?
What kid doesn't like comics?
Yeah.
Right. I think it wasn't comics though. It was a picture book. I think it was Bill Pete.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill Pete draws in such a way that it feels like comics because he comes from Disney. He's an animator, right? The director of The Jungle Book and 101 Dalmatians. He did a book called The Caboose Who Got Loose. And I remember just staring at that book and reading it front to cover, from cover to back, countless times, because the drawings looked like they were coming out of the page.
Yeah.
So I wanted to figure out how to do that. And then I saw Mort Drucker and Mad Magazine copy that I would get at a grocery store, and it looked like his people were just popping out of the page. And I was like, I want to do whatever that is. I want to do that.
Why was it that people popping out of the page thing that stood out to you so much?
I think as a kid, I always had these ideas that could be movies or just living adventures that I saw in my head. They weren't necessarily drawings. I didn't know how to put them out into the world. And I thought movies could be that, but I had no idea how I could go down that road.
Yeah.
And as a kid, you're powerless. And so the cartoons look like a very fast way for me to get there, that I could depict these ideas that I have in a way that people can understand. And as a kid, I could access it. So that's why I started to draw.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't because I liked drawing. I actually kind of didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think it's funny. I think that there's two things that are often kind of discounted when it comes to the roots of comic creators, because people are always like, oh, what's a comic that really influenced you or whatever. I think comic strips are often kind of forgotten as a really important part. You talk to a lot of people and they'll be like, my first comic was X, Y, or Z. But then you're like, did you read any comic strips? They're like, oh yeah, I read For Better or Worse or Calvin and Hobbes or whatever. But then another one is picture books. I don't know if there was a picture book when I was a kid called The 11th Hour, and I studied it like it was the absolute Bible for my life. And I think that because it was integrating words and pictures in a really unique way that wasn't like comics, but it wasn't not like comics.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people forget that even though it's different, it kind of helps you speak that language, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's words and pictures on paper. Ultimately, they're all kind of the same.
Yeah.
I think someone like Brian Selznick blurs that line all the time.
Is that Stinky Cheese Man?
No, Brad Selznick did The Invention of Hugo Cabret.
Oh, yeah.
Marvels, and his work is essentially comics. It's not that different than a graphic novel, but I think it's categorized differently because it's presented differently. But yeah, I think that my favorite artists were the ones who accepted their medium and used the strengths of the medium and didn't try to make it another medium. And I like that there were a lot of people in comics that made books that felt like toys, or like they felt like fun. Like you opened it up and it was just this activity.
Who's an example they can think of that really matches that?
This isn't a comic, but I actually think of Shel Silverstein all the time.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I just think the way you can access it from any point at any given time, and the way the words and pictures work together, they create a very specific space, a very defined space of his. And it feels magical. Like I'm visiting that space. But going back to the comic strip thing you're talking about, I think Garfield is often forgotten.
Oh, yeah.
And Garfield was the thing. I think Garfield was basically what Dogman and Wimpy Kid is to kids today. Back then, we were all running to the book fair to try to be the first one to get a copy of Garfield.
Oh, yeah. I was that kid at one point.
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel like, I know Copper is a long time ago at this point, but do you feel like, when I was just looking at a book of Copper.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I look at some of the setups you have in there, and it does kind of feel more comic strippy in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think there was some roots in there too?
Well, Copper did start as a comic strip.
Yeah.
It was my web comic, and it was always supposed to be like one pagers. And the inspiration for Copper was actually Little Nemo and Slumberland and
Winsor
Peanuts.
McKay.
Yeah, so it was like Winsor McKay, it was Schultz, and it was George Harriman. Later, when people would ask me, was this inspired by Calvin and Hobbes? It was strange because I love Calvin and Hobbes, but it wasn't, because I didn't grow up with Calvin and Hobbes. My newspaper didn't carry it. I didn't actually find Calvin and Hobbes until I was in college. But I think his inspirations were similar to mine. And then so both the comics kind of ran alongside each other in some sense.
Yeah.
That
makes sense. I did want to ask about how the love manifests for you as a creator versus a reader. Like, do you think that you love similar things about comics as a reader and as a creator? Like, is the overlap there, or are there different things that appeal to you as a creator versus as a reader?
I think it definitely overlaps. If I'm not excited about it as a reader, I don't think I would want to work on it. But what excites me as a reader, I don't know. These days, I'm just trying to do something that isn't like anything I've done before.
Yeah.
So, I do think of the book though as a device. As more of a toy than anything else, really, like a machine. Like, how is somebody going to pick this up and use it in their life? For me, I almost exclusively read nonfiction, and there's utility to nonfiction that is by design. These are made for your life to help you with your life. I want to find ways to make comics feel that way. The fact that comics are now used to get kids reading, I think, has utility to it. And I have leaned into that. But I think there's more. There's more to it. And ultimately, I think comics' greatest superpower is information compression.
Interesting. In what way?
In a time when there's so much information around us, I think comics can deliver a tremendous amount of information at an incredible rate of speed, like in a very small window, in a very short amount of time. So it is a time saver if you do it right.
Right.
If you're compressing. I think when we look back at the comics that built the comics industry as we know it, the mainstream comic industry, the fact that they had these guys like Jack Kirby, Mike Ditko, Steve Ditko,
God, I would love to see Mike Ditko.
I would like to see a Mike Ditko comic.
Yeah, I would too.
But Steve, But like what Stan Lee and his crew were doing, they didn't have time. They had small windows, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was this sense in every one of their comics that there was a lot being told in a very short amount of time. There was like a universe on a page. I've noticed that because people have a hard time putting together the books these days, like a graphic novel, they're doing graphic novels, not comics. They are having a hard time compressing information because they're just trying to find enough information to fill the page.
Mm-hmm.
So if a graphic novel is created with information compression built in, something like a Mouse or Watchmen, a lot of the evergreen books that we consider our staple graphic novels, those have high density information compressed into short packets. And people recognize it even if they've never read a comic before in their life. They go, this has utility to it, and I want to read more.
Have you read Craig Thompson's Ginseng Roots yet?
The new one?
Yeah.
No, I haven't, no.
That's one of the things that really amazed me about it is the density of information, but also the clarity of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Like trying to walk that line of like, I'm not overwhelming people, but also delivering so much information is one of the most incredible things about that book.
Okay.
And I think that that's one of the things that's interesting is like, I imagine for you after reading for so long and creating for so long, do you find that when you're looking at comics that like, even though you still love the same things, you love great art and you love great writing, you love all these things, do you think sometimes the thing that gets you most excited is seeing things delivered in a new way or like maybe delivered in a way that you wouldn't expect perhaps?
Yeah, I think I like being surprised.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't know what would excite me. So if someone just does something that changes my mind about something, if someone does a thing that changes my mind about anything, I'm on board. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that. That has power.
Mm. Can you think of a semi-recent example of something that really moved you like that?
In comics form?
Yeah.
Dogman.
Dogman?
Yeah. I think so. I think Dogman is probably the one that I would put I would put at the top of the list.
I think the thing that's interesting is I've talked to some comic artists who I think that they have kind of a I don't know, complex relationship with Dogman because they look at it like, especially direct market artists, and they look at it and they just see really simple art and they're like, this is not great or something like that. But I think the thing that's amazing about it is like when I talk to my friends who are parents and they talk about their kids reading it and they would talk about reading it with them, it connects with people on this very like visceral, unexplainable level where it's just like, like kids feel it, they love it, they live in it. It really resonates with them in a way that's unusual. And I think that sometimes like when people are looking at comics, they kind of will mistake simplicity with like not being meaningful. And like I think that's the amazing thing about Dogman is it seems like for everyone who engages with it, there is a lot of meaning to it.
Absolutely, it is incredibly complex. Dogman is the modern day equivalent of Crazy Cat. I'm kind of blown away by Dogman more and more. Even recently, I've been looking at it and studying it because I would like to consider doing a more early reader comic. And for example, I was looking at the size of Dogman, and I thought, okay, so is this the new standard? Are we going to move to this because this is not a 6x9? Amulet is 6x9. So do I need to move it to Dave's size so we have it consistent across the board on the shelf? And I was thinking, why did Dave choose this size? It's 8.5 by 5.5. So I was gonna do a rough draft of this new comic I was doing, and I was like, so I'm measuring out the pages, and I realized 8.5 by 5.5. Why is it? Oh,
why is it?
It's a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper folded in half.
Oh my God.
Because this comic is made by kids.
Right.
Yeah. And so they have access to 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. They would fold it in half and staple it. That's why Dogman is that size.
Yeah.
So the object itself, like I said before, is like a machine. It's like a work of art. It's like a sculpture. And the graphic novels also have more depth than nearly anything else I've seen on the shelf. Every one of these books are a tribute to classic literature. I mean, just the titles alone are are like Mad Magazine parodies of classic literature.
Yeah.
Right. And then inside the book, you have all these characters where nearly all of the bad guys are lovable. And so all you have is a bunch of people with all these different problems, and you are kind of on board with those things. And that kind of represents the depth of great villains that we've seen in the past. Yeah. And he does that very, very effectively and very fast. It's constantly breaking walls and barriers. When you read the book, I mean, there's a lot of activities that occur in the middle of the story, as if he doesn't care if you break his story. He wants you to. And so he's sitting there in between the medium and the reader, and he is interfacing with them in a way that has no rules placed on them.
Yeah.
And that freedom of movement people appreciate, because they don't often get that. You know, they are often not trusted by the creators. I think the success of Dogman and Minecraft at its core is that they trust their audience so much that they've given all of the power to them. And they've given them something complex, yet they, in both instances, look deceptively simple.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Love sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and action? Then 2000 AD is the greatest comic you're not reading. 2000 AD has a whole universe of characters from Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog through to Rogue Trooper, Zenith, Shakara, and many more. In every weekly issue, you get 5 action-packed stories from incredible creators including Garth Ennis, Rob Williams, Alex DeCampi, and Dan Abnett. Get a print subscription and it'll arrive at your door every week, and your first issue is free. Or subscribe digitally, get free back issues, and download DRM free copies of each issue for just $9 a month. That's 128 pages of incredible comics every month for less than $10. And all subscribers get amazing offers like money off vouchers and exclusive products. Head to 2000AD.com and click on subscribe now, or download the 2000AD app and start reading today. And now, back to the show. All right, that was Kazu Kibuishi talking about why he loves comics. And up next, we have Ryan North, the writer of Marvel's One World Under Doom, Fantastic Four, and my beloved The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, amongst a great many other things. The guy's pretty busy, and he's joining me to talk about his own love of comics. So, Ryan North.
Hello.
Why do you love comics so much? What makes you love them?
There's a hole in my heart that I'm always trying to fill.
It's an enigma.
Comics are flexible. You can sort of pack them in there. No, the honest answer is, I think it's because it's a young medium, and we don't know where the walls are yet. Same reason like video games. With prose, with novels, we kind of know what you can do with the written word. There's still surprises, House of Leaves or whatever, but for a large extent, the walls are pretty solid. And in comics and in video games as well, they're not. And my definition of a great comic is a book that, yeah, it's got a great story, great art, whatever, but it's also showing me something that can be done with the medium that I haven't seen done before. And if you think about it, that's an incredibly high bar. Like if you had that restriction for paintings or art, novels or whatever, it's very hard to do that because, like I said, the walls are pretty solid, but they're not in comics. So the sense of possibility and of working in a young medium where you don't yet know what can't be done, I think it's very exciting.
Do you think that same thing kind of appeals to you? Like, does that appeal to you as a reader and as a creator?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't read comics growing up.
Yeah.
I started when I got my first paycheck and walked to a comic book store and bought books at random. And so that initial experience, those very first books was like, I didn't know comics could do that. One of the books was Superman Peace on Earth. And I didn't know you could tell a story with superheroes that had such heart to it and was about such a real world thing like, why can't Superman solve world hunger? So that sense of like, oh, I didn't, this is bigger than I thought it was. I'm always chasing that, and it's very easy to find it in comics.
I do think it's interesting. I remember when we were doing a podcast last time, you pointed out the fact that I had Eddie Campbell's Alec behind me. And I do think it's interesting that like, it seems like, especially the further you go, like I was talking to Kazu Kibuishi about the same subject, and it seems like sometimes it's like you want something that, when you're a creator, you want to find things that expand what you think comics can be. And that's like really enriching for you as a creator, but also as a reader.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't really draw a distinction between it because as a reader, you're like, wow, that's cool. I never saw that before. And as a creator, you're like, wow, that's cool. I never saw that before. Maybe I can use it. But it's the same experience.
Do you feel like that's something you look to do in your own books? You were just talking about Fantastic Four and trying to find these different pairings and everything like that. Is that something that you look to do, is try to find ways that you can stretch and you can push and you can pull and find new directions?
Sometimes, less than I did in, say, Adventure Time or Squirrel Girl, where I felt like there was more actual formalist experimentation there. Now, there's some in Fantastic Four, but not as much as in those ones, mainly because with FF, you've got, the 4 to 5 to 9 main characters. I also want to have a big science fiction idea. I want to have a twist. I want to have some emotional recognition and discovery. All that in 20 pages. There's oftentimes not a lot of room for, on top of that, let's do some new stuff with the medium.
Right.
So I fit it in where I can, but.
Do you think that, you did Slaughterhouse-5 with Albert Montes, which is amazing. Do you feel like with longer form stories like that you can find more space for things like that?
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the goals of the work, is that I felt like when I started thinking about adapting Slaughterhouse-5, the first question is, well, what is a good adaptation from one medium to another? And where I landed on was I wanted it to be able to justify itself. That if you had someone never heard of Slaughterhouse-5, never heard of Kurt Vonnegut, when you read this comic, you wouldn't say, wow, what a great adaptation from another medium.
Right.
You'd say, wow, what a great comic. And so anywhere I could find some way to tell the story in a way that only comics could, I would take that approach. And so the result is something that I think feels like it was maybe meant to be a comic.
Yeah.
There's bits where, like Vonnegut describes the Tralfamadorian literature as being a bunch of urgently described images, text, seen all at once. And I'm like, this sounds like a splash page to me with a bunch of panels. Like, this sounds like a double-page spread. So that's what I did. I put the Tralfamadorian book as comics, and you can see all these images at once, but they tell you a story. They're arranged in order. So having that be part of the DNA of the book made it very easy to find, not very easy, but very satisfying to find all these opportunities to actually do them there.
Yeah.
Make it feel like it was born in comics.
It's funny. Somebody recently asked me this question. It was like for one of my mailbags that I do. And it was about like, if you ran the Department of Education, what comics or graphic novels would you want to be read?
Oh boy.
Or in there, or like in for schools and everything. And I was like, I'm not going to differentiate by age, but one of them was Slaughterhouse-5.
Oh, thank you.
And I think there's two reasons for that. One, I said that like some people might connect with the comic in a different way than they would like Kurt Vonnegut's writing, but also because you're able to deliver those ideas in different ways in the same way that you're talking about. I think that's one of the things that I really love about comics is like, I learned from comics. Comics changed how I see the world, and comics expanded the way that I think about the world. And I think sometimes the things that I learn from comics are really connected to the things I love about comics, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think I feel the same way.
Yeah. I did want to ask, so I think one of the interesting things is like you make comics for a living, and you also used to read comics. I mean, you still read comics.
I still do.
You still do. Do you feel like making comics has changed how you read or feel about comics?
A little bit, in the sense of the second you study something, you'll never be able to experience the medium in the same way. I remember I did minor in film studies, and the first day of the first class, one of the teachers warned us, like, I'm going to teach you a way to look at film, and once you learn this, you won't be able to enjoy film in the naive way you did before. And he's right. Like you start to see the intent behind the choices instead of just the choices. But I don't think that's a lesser reading. I think it's just a different reading. I remember I was thinking recently about watching Star Trek when I was a kid, TNG, and I did not conceive of why anyone would watch anything other than sci-fi, because sci-fi shows you what the future is going to be like.
Right.
Because I didn't know that there were these restrictions on television productions. I didn't know that there was like deadlines for writers and budget constraints. I just thought everyone would put their whole effort towards showing the future.
Yeah.
And this idea of restrictions on that wasn't there. And once I learned that, this was something created by humans and not prophets, and there are all these restrictions on what they can do, it didn't change. I mean, it changed the way I experienced Star Trek, made it a more mature experience with it, but I enjoyed both of them, right? Like I like to watch a movie and then learn about the choices made how they told that story, why they do X or Y. So it's not I don't think it's a loss, but it's certainly at least a different viewpoint, a step sideways maybe.
I imagine it can enrich it in some ways. Sometimes when you see something that's really well done, or maybe something that like makes you think, how did they do that?
Yep. Or when you see something that's done poorly and you're like, oh, I know how I know how to fix that. Something my wife Jen and I do when we watch a movie. I don't know how we started it. Someone, falls from a height or is in a car accident or something, gets punched out really hard, and then they just get up because it's meant to be a dramatic punch.
Sure.
But we'll just lean over and be like, we'll whisper, dead. It's like the person is dead. And realize the person is dead. That's now when you watch a movie, we're always aware of like when they cheat, when that person is absolutely dead. They're not getting out of that car crash.
Yeah.
They're not getting out from that plane, diving. Just like, oh, they're dead. It's fine.
Yeah.
But it's on top of enjoying the movie for what it's trying to do.
Right. I mean, you're aware of what's happening, and like it can enrich it in the same way, even though you still enjoy the story in a base way.
Yeah.
I don't know if this would be as big of an issue for you because you're not. I mean, like you were on that cover of ZCN with Jeff Lemire, and Jeff does like a million books, and like one of the things that I think can happen when you're doing so much is like you can get burned out, and you can like get lost in the tricks and everything like that. What keeps, you could get burned out, but what keeps you excited about comics after doing it for as long as you have?
It's still the sense of possibility of not knowing where the walls are, like I was saying, but also being very aware of that. Like I have had friends who are doing, too much. I'm going to do 8 monthly books. That's crazy. To me, that's crazy. I don't think I could do that. And so I very purposely don't do that. I'll do 1 monthly book, maybe 2 monthly books. But I don't want to get to a point where it starts to feel like work and like labor, because for me, the joy of writing is getting to sit down and play, tell this story, solve the problems with it, like figure it out. And when that becomes work, it's so much harder. It's so much harder to sit down and be like, all right, now I'm going to deal with the story, but maybe I'll just check my email first, or maybe I'll just do the stuff. So I always try to keep it fun. To avoid burnout, but the core of it is just like comics are still something that's really interesting that I haven't figured out. I think this is bringing to mind, like you see couples who have been, how do you stay married for 50 years? Right. Well, she's still a mystery, and I'm still figuring them out. Like there's still unanswered questions that you can still be surprised. You don't know what you're going to discover when you turn over the next rock. And I feel like that's part of it. It
almost seems like an important part for you is knowing where your own walls are, where you like getting to the point where when you would be making it not fun for yourself. And if you got to that point, it might take away from the job in a way that would be diminishing for you.
Yeah. And I've been lucky enough to be able to only do writing jobs I want to do. There was one time in my life where I took a job that I was like, well, I'm not feeling enthused about this, but I'll try it. And it was so lousy. Like it was so much work. The book actually never came out. It was postponed, delayed for other reasons. But what a great lesson to be like, to learn that I can't do this. It sucks to try to do it. And then to not have it come out and worry about it being bad.
Yeah. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. In store this June, Oni Press proudly presents a science fiction icon's unlikely return to existence in Benjamin #1, a new prestige format limited series from Philip K. Dick Award winner Ben H. Winters and artist Leo Max. Do you remember the work of acclaimed novelist Benjamin J. Karp? Across more than 44 novels and hundreds of short stories, Karp established himself as a counterculture revolutionary. He died in 1982 after years of Southern Californian excess finally claimed his life, until 2025 when Benjamin Karp awakens alive in a burned-out motel room on the fringes of Los Angeles. He remembers dying. He knows he shouldn't exist. Now, as he treks from Studio City to Venice Beach and onward into the paranoid sprawl of 21st century Los Angeles, he'll be called to investigate his greatest mystery yet, himself. Explore the metatextual nexus between existence and oblivion, past and future, genius and madness this June in Benjamin #1, only from Oni Press. And now, back to the show. All right, that was Ryan North chatting with me about why he loves comics. And to close, I have a delightful chat with cartoonist Lucy Knisley of Whoa, Kid Gloves, and Relish fame. Although that list could go on and on, as she's done a ton of graphic novels and picture books and everything else. It was a super fun chat. And here you go. So, what I want to talk to you about is why you love comics. You've been doing it for a long time. I'm sure you were reading before then. What is it that you love so much about comics as a medium?
Well, I've just been making stories this way instinctively my entire life. I think most of us start out with this understanding of sequential images. And that is how we all begin connecting with books. That's how we all begin connecting with stories. That's how we start telling stories. That's how we start reading as picture books, which are comics. And I think it is not only this like integral part of how we came to books in the first place, but I mean, cave paintings are comics. It's like as long as human beings have been recording stories, we've been making sequential images in this way. I think it is a really instinctive way to tell stories. And for me, it's always made a ton of sense. For a while in my youth, I thought that I would have to choose between being an artist or a writer. And I love to make art and I love to tell stories. And I thought I'm going to have to make a choice at some point and give the other one up.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't. I went to 4 different high schools in 4 years, and I was a kid with undiagnosed ADHD and having a tough time with, divorced parents and 9/11 happening in my like sophomore year and stuff like that. And I lived in New York. So high school was a really tough time for me. And I was like, oh, I'm not getting into any college with a liberal arts degree. No writing program will accept me. So art it is. I'm going to have to give up writing and storytelling. And just about as soon as I got to art school, I realized I don't want to have to give that up. And why would I ever give that up? I can do both. I can be a comic artist and not give up art, not give up writing, just combine the two into this sort of perfect art form for me that just has always made sense and has always been something I've instinctively done, but never tried to monetize or do professionally before. And as soon as I sort of was brought to my first comic convention, met my first indie comic artists who are really trying to make a go of it, I realized this is a job. This is something that people can do. And I'm so jealous of kids growing up now and meeting comic artists and seeing these incredible middle grade and YA comics coming out, because we were so starved for that kind of thing growing up. And now kids have such more exposure to that as a career, to that as an art form too. And they get to see so much more than I ever did. So they're already way ahead of me.
I do think it's funny that you brought up picture books. When I was talking to Kazu earlier about the same subject, we started talking about picture books too. I kind of feel like picture books are slept on as like a baseline, like if you like this, you're probably going to like comics too, because what is it? It's a combination of words and pictures.
Right.
And like, I think there's something very fundamental and primal about that combination. You were talking about cave paintings, but I mean, it's not just kids. I mean, it just speaks to you. And I think for some people, it almost like unlocks reading for them in a lot of ways.
Yes. And, people say that they're simpler, that, you need to move on to books without pictures, that sort of thing. But, I argue that it is a form of reading that offers more information. And that can never be bad. You're getting to interpret characters' expressions. You're getting to read in between the panels. Your own mind has to interpret what happens in between these panels. And that is like this other form of reading happening in your brain simultaneously with reading the narrative of the story. And it's so interesting to me when people say that, comics are for kids or comics are somehow lesser than, published prose without pictures, because it's, to me, this additional aspect, more information, more to look at, more to process, which seems like it would be more, more advanced reading form. And I've always thought that it's a wonderful sort of simultaneous way for your mind to work, to take in a story.
Are there any comics or creators that you feel like helped unlock your love and like understanding of comics along the way?
Yeah, tons. I mean, I talked about how I got started in like the LiveJournal days, and a lot of those people that were LiveJournal buddies of mine at the time are now working professionals, and seeing their work now is just as inspirational as it was for me back then. And these are people like Vera Brosgol and Raina Telgemeier, Erica Moen, Jess Fink, I mean, Kazu Kibuishi was like, this incredible person who was doing the flight anthologies back then and just sort of like picking people off of LiveJournal to invite them to come do these anthologies. And like, it was such a cool time when all these people were getting started. And now it seems like they're so brick and mortar of the whole industry. They've always been here. They've always been these incredible titans of the industry. And they weren't always. They were kids on LiveJournal, and we were all just buddies sharing art and doing these fun projects together. So it's really cool to see kids kind of carrying on that tradition now.
Do you know the cartoonist Chris Schweitzer by chance?
I do, yeah.
Chris told me that I think it was seeing one of Raina's comics online that like unlocked it for him, where it was just like, oh my God, I can do this. Like the comics are a thing.
This is a real job.
And we're at Alaska Robotics Minicon recording this, and I do think that's one of the interesting things about comics is like there's like a passing of the baton, like handing down across generations thing that's magic about this event because, after this, you're going to go to comics camp and you're going to talk to all these like really young cartoonists about like your journeys. And like there's a reciprocal relationship and like something that gets passed down the generations. I'm not trying to make you feel old, by the way.
No, I am. Don't worry. But no, it's really interesting because comics camp is also very equalized. There's not a lot of sort of like you're the elder statesman, you're the brand new person. Like we're all just working to make comics together. And all the conversations reflect that in such a way that we're all just sharing our own experiences and our information. But it doesn't come from this like teaching, passing down the torch thing. It comes from these comparisons of working in the same industry, which I love about camp because it's brand new talent. It's people that are really established and we're all just sort of on the same level.
Do you feel like, so you come up reading comics and then you start making your own comics. Do you feel like the same thing, you love the same things as a creator as you did as a reader, or do you think it kind of evolved the more you made comics?
I think I'm kind of all over the place as a reader. I can't possibly say that I'm making work that I would love to read because I love to read so many different kinds of things. And I'm lucky enough that I've gotten to make picture books and I've gotten to make, elementary level, middle grade, YA, and adult work. And I'm really, really lucky to have worked in all of these age ranges. And I really think that the visual storytelling medium of comics works for all these age ranges in a really excellent way. But I get to do very different work for all these ages. I get to make work that maybe I would have loved as a kid and maybe I would have found totally boring for a totally different kid than I was. But yeah, I mean, I was at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago getting this fine arts degree. I was a freshman there, like learning about encaustic painting and sculpture and stuff and being like, whoops, I've made an error. And now they have a great comics program there. But at the time they did not. And comics was not considered an art form at this very traditional art school. But I started making comics in the school newspaper. And they were seen by a senior when I was a freshman. And this was Hope Larson.
Oh, wow.
A wonderful, incredible comic artist. And she kind of took me under her wing. She took me to my first TCAF and introduced me to a lot of other artists that I still know to this day. And that sort of elder statesman passing along and like, opening up and welcoming in thing is something that I experienced as a young artist. And I really, really want to pass that on and welcome and encourage new young artists to just like join in. If you're making comics, you're doing it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's really amazing. I was talking to somebody about podcasting and comics earlier, and while they are wildly different mediums, one of the things that's kind of amazing is like if you have a pencil or if you have a microphone, you can do it.
Right.
And it's just like there aren't like some of the best comics are simple. Some of the best comics don't have to be complicated. You don't have to be drawing like Jack Kirby or whatever. You can draw like yourself.
No,
There's no wrong
I was making
answers.
comics on copy paper with number 2 pencils when I started out, and that's fine. I still like to work in that medium sometimes, and there is nothing wrong with that. And it's such a low barrier to entry. It's really a wonderful part about this industry.
I love your table. I love the different things you do. Like I got the one of me as a cat earlier. And so it seems like, I don't know, I think one of the things that's interesting is it's like a choose your own adventure story. You can do all these different things and can kind of enrich your love of art and comics in a lot of different ways. Do you feel like kind of diversifying what you do helps you love comics more and in different ways?
Yeah, for sure. I'm also like, I used to be much more of a songwriter, and I would have all these sort of different forms of art that I would work in. And it's narrowed over the years as I get more tired and have more book contracts to fulfill and things like that. But I really do think that everything you do and experience and throw yourself into is going to feed into the pot of your creative endeavors and make your comics better. My comics make my songs better, and my songs make my comics better, and my parenting experiences feed into my artistic experiences and my friendship experiences, and it's all really connected in a really wonderful way.
Last question for you. It's funny. I was talking to somebody about this earlier, where the idea of like you can make comics seem like you're like trying to make a relationship work, because it can be a lot. You're like, I have a graphic novel to do, and then I have a picture book to do, and like that's not just pages. That's time. That's a lot, and it's easy to get burned out with this stuff.
Yeah.
What keeps you excited about making comics?
Well, I mean, I've experienced my times of burnout for sure. One of them being like just before I came to camp last year, where I was like, I got to do something to reinvigorate my love of this medium, of this industry. And part of that was to reconnect with other people in the industry. And it's so important, I think, to not just be like, oh, these people are doing incredible things and they're so wonderful and they're so kind and it's such a great experience to know them, but also to hear them complain about the same crap that you're upset about, like hear them with their publisher woes, with their like AI or plagiarism or book banning woes that you're facing. Being a comic artist, you work primarily alone in your house,
right,
usually. And you can feel really, really alone in doing it. You can feel like you're the only one going through this. And you're like, wow, I must be really bad at like dealing with marketing departments at publishers because I've never had a good one or that sort of thing, until you get to a place where you're working with other professionals and you're like, hey, so how was your experience with the marketing department? And they're like, oh, yeah, well, So it's a wonderful reality check, because you're not just in your home spiraling by yourself going like, I'm a terrible person because I can't get past this artist block or something like that. And then you see another artist and you respect them so much and they're like, oh yeah, this terrible artist block last week and I couldn't get over it. And then I, kind of pulled myself out of it. And it's a wonderful way to recalibrate yourself.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode that was mostly recorded in person at this year's Alaska Robotics Minicon. Before we get into the typical outro, I just want to give a quick shout out to the people that run that event, Pat Race and Aaron Schuring, who were wonderfully welcoming to a comics journalist and podcaster who infiltrated their event and was wowed by the whole thing. I cannot stress this enough to you. Alaska Robotics Minicon is an absolute blast. It has an amazing lineup. And if you happen to be in the area, or if you're a creator that's interested in going to that and or its comics camp, I highly recommend applying because it absolutely rules. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Kazu Kibuishi, writer Ryan North, and cartoonist Lucy Knisley. You can find Kazu's work in the Amulet series at Scholastic Graphics, Ryan's work in One World Under Doom and Fantastic Four at Marvel, and Lucy's work in Whoa, a House Cat's Story of Despair over at Random House Graphic. As per usual, big thanks to Deanna Chapman for editing this week's episode. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my Eisner Award nominated subscription comic site Sketch at sketch.com for long form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketch on social media by following on Blue Sky and Instagram or following me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Big thanks to my existing patrons, including Luis Felipe Alves, John Walsh, Brandon Paul, Aaron Bussey, AC, Simon Birch, Austin, Scion, T.S. Luther, Megan Marsden, Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast, Scott Carpenter, Gus, Menkei Freigeist, Saunter, Brian, Chris Robinson, David Byrne, Milton Lawson, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Neer Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Eurotam, Henry Johnston, Dennis Hoffman, Jingo Broren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rob V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Klaus Vandeven, Subben Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon Pillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shelby, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kangas, Nick Bennett, Susanna Pola, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Robert Wilson IV, Andrew Carita, Stefan Holt, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Walt's Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brawley, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Odd Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.